All right, welcome everyone to today's Idea Cafe. Of course, now my computer decides to bug me with a whole bunch of stuff. Today's topic is what outside role would help your project the most. We're just going to give Bentley a couple seconds here to show up so that he's not joining halfway through a sentence.
Sounds good. Is Jubilee not coming today?
No, she's going to be watching on YouTube and then probably participating that way. So if you see comments that I or somebody else missed, we can do it that way. All right, here comes Ben.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, in there. Perfect. Hey, Bentley.
Hey guys, sorry about that.
Hey, no worries. All right, so as a recap, we're doing the Idea Cafe, and the session is what outside role would help your project. Oh, and Matthews just showed up. Perfect. Hey, Tush. So, all right. So somebody else want to go first, or should I?
I'm happy to.
Sure.
I just was identifying that I need a researcher on my project, so someone to look up studies and do some analysis of those studies and categorization and stuff like that. I can do some of that. I'm not great at it, so that's something. And then some other roles I've identified would be kind of a community person once I kind of have a community, but someone to help me build that community. Those are, I think, the main roles, and then it would just be kind of duplicating me as far as development and stuff like that. So those are the type of collaborators I would be looking for.
Okay. And then the data one, it sounds like, is the most pressing as far as like sort of time-wise, and like you could actually use them now.
Yeah, I think I'm to the point where I could use a researcher. So yeah, I'm kind of putting the call out, trying to figure out how to find someone reliable and how much money I should invest in that. So
that makes sense. Charlotte or Matush, either of you want to go next?
I can go pretty quick here. I could probably use somebody to help me with social media. I have a challenging time being on the computer much. It kind of triggers some of my migraines, so.
Fair enough. And actually, I just realized as you're explaining that we didn't give any sort of like an elevator pitch intro to a project. Can you give like a 5 or 10 second what your project is?
Okay. I'm working towards having an art exhibition, and hopefully I can introduce not just my idea of a, humanitarian metacurrency, but also maybe other people's Game B ideas, just to kind of get more information out into the world about all these alternatives that people are working towards.
Okay, and is that the same project? Like it's an art exhibition where one of the pieces of art are these kind of projects?
Actually, like my biggest goal for it would be, it's kind of like a social sculpture, which is an old term from the 70s, but a way to use art to introduce kind of Game B and then let people actually practice it on their own, and not like this bigger, like there's a lot of really big and complex ideas in the Game B world, but kind of on a more organic level, and see how that could work for people. So it's a social experiment, I guess you'd say, but introducing it with art, just a reason to come together. If that makes sense.
I see. So like art and making use of sort of some of the Game B concepts to love those two. Cool. And Bentley, do you want to take a quick step back from your needs and give a quick recap of Recent Score?
Yeah, so Recent Score is a tool to help with mass agreement. So reducing people's kind of misunderstanding and biases and stuff, so that we can come to agreement and work together. So yeah, it's a good description.
Perfect, thank you. And Matush?
Yeah, I love the concept of introducing ideas through art. It's something that we need more of, definitely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, my mind mapping project is moving along. I managed to kill a few bugs, and it's like almost live. I hope to have the first public version available this week, which is now I think, unlikely to happen. But early next week, hopefully, I have something to show. Can't promise, but yeah, getting there.
Cool. That was good. Sorry, was there a particular role you needed help with and I missed it, or is that are you not there yet?
Not there yet. As soon as I have the public version up and running somewhere, I'll definitely. I'm going to ask. Spread the word, and then hopefully get some interest and testing and like general feedback if my direction, which I think makes sense. It makes sense for other people as well.
Right.
If like anyone is interested. Some people are, which is good.
Nice. And then do you feel that you've got the reaching out part, the marketing part handled, and you're just sort of looking for testers, or do you think that you'd also need help with sort of marketing, getting people coming inside?
I think everything.
Okay.
Because it's it's complicated. But
Fair enough.
when there is something to show, I will be able to explain better what exactly it is I need help with.
Okay, that makes sense. I guess I can go next. So my project is called WikiLection. It's not terribly dissimilar to Reason Score. Its sort of main thing is to fight against misinformation, specifically around politics, science, and news. And very similar to Bentley's, I definitely need someone to sort of help with like the kind of marketing community building side. And then technically I also need a developer, but luckily the two that I might be working with are in this call, so I'm not sure if that one counts. Yeah, so I think if we're not including the developers, which is realistically my next actual step to get something out there to actually show, then it would be kind of what I'm just vaguely calling a marketing person, which is sort of that like building the community side, but then also just generally building an audience that's maybe, you know, not super interested, but like they'll follow a page or something to keep tabs to sort of help build both of those.
So do you have the designs and like specs that someone can actually use to? We started last week.
Yeah, I've been working on that this week. I think I'm almost ready to share it. There's a couple more mock-ups I want to add just to make it a bit clearer. But yeah, I think probably like today or tomorrow, I should have something that I can send to both you and Bentley, sort of say, hey, here's what it is. Nice. I think it was in one of the sessions last week, I'd sort of mentioned, it may have been the after session one, like after we stopped recording.
After party,
where I picked Bentley's brain on the idea of using Ruby on Rails, and we sort of had to talk about maybe just post the general design and then see what the developers come back with. Some might recommend Ruby on Rails, some might recommend other stuff. So we'll probably do that.
I did hear it because I generally watch the meetings after they happen.
Right. Okay. Cool. Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was actually recorded or not. I thought it wasn't, but if you watched it,
recorded.
It must have been. Okay. All right. I think that's sort of the main part, and then the next part to this, I believe, is usually sort of does anyone have anything, you know, more complex or a specific thing on their project that they wanted to bring up and get feedback on?
I was thinking we could talk about a little bit more about your developer needs, Adriel, since it kind of fits this topic.
Right.
And I know you're not ready to share the specs, but Martush, are you available for? Do you have time for something like this, or?
Yes. Generally, the answer is yes. Mostly because, well, first of all, my project is like almost. I was planning on just putting it live and then having a small break from it, so I can now step aside a bit and wait for some feedback and see what happens. And then after a week or two, I have like with fresh mind go back to it and in the meantime, yes, I would definitely have time to look at the designs and see what can be done quickly. I mean, reasonably and quickly.
Yeah, I'm about in the same place. Like I mentioned, I'm going to hire I want to hire a researcher, but if I thought about it and said, well, I could do it myself. So really all I'm doing is trading my time to get someone else to do it, who of course probably be better and faster. So then I thought, well, maybe it's time for me to get a little side gig. So we could see which one of us kind of helps, or it might not be bad if we work on it together, and that way Adriel has a backup. But we'll see how it goes. But I'm not in need. So yeah, if I could provide value. Do you have a technology stack that you would prefer to do on a project like what he said?
My preferred stack is React and actually recently Firebase, which I found, well, thanks to you, very easy to use and very quick to utilize as backend.
Yeah, especially
great.
for a prototype.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's probably what I would have suggested, unless I wanted to play with Svelte, which is a new kind of framework, but that wouldn't be, React would be much more, other people could take over.
Which one?
Svelte, S-V-E-L-T, S-V-L-E-T, Svelte.
Oh, okay.
It's pretty new, and it's not quite, I think it's production ready, but it's not used by a lot of people. So it would be a risk to choose that as the platform. Although Adriel's kind of mentioned that this is really a prototype, and he expects to probably redo it. But if we do it if it's done in React, then you would have a pretty wide group of developers that could pick it up and run.
I think it does make more sense to use a more established language. So if there are any issues, we can be fairly sure it's not with the language and not with the stack. So we're like, is this a wiki election bug or is this a Svelte bug?
Yeah. So I guess when you come out with that, both Martush and I can take a look at it and maybe we could collaborate on that. I think that would be fun if you're up to it, Martush.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That's cool. And then React, is that still sort of like it's as like quick to prototype as Ruby? Or
yes.
Ish? Okay, cool.
I would say so, yeah.
It's
sounds good.
It can be done in a way that has a lot of ceremony, which a lot of large corporations do if they have a large app. But if you want to prototype, there are some paths that are not as kind of heavy to do. So there are shortcuts that are accepted practice.
So they have sort of like Rail-ish, where it's sort of like you can get some packages that make it easier, but overall it's kind of more open.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Martush and I could talk about whether we want to bother with something this small to use like Redux or any sort of thing, or just use the built-in, what's the new stuff, hooks or whatever. But
hooks are great. I would definitely use them. They are interestingly, at first, they are not very intuitive, but then you discover that they are much better to make the code clean, and they have some like funny things and side effects sometimes. But generally, the code is much cleaner, and they are easy to use, and they are like good.
Yeah, and I think that'd be a lot easier than there. So like, not that it matters, Adriel, to you, but normally if you're doing a large application, you'd probably use like Redux or something. But there's a lot of to do something. It takes a lot more time, and it's not that's more stable, but it's more kind of broken apart, so you can add things better later. But if you're doing a prototype, you really want to get your ideas out. So yeah, hooks would be something more useful. That's just internal tech speak. But yeah, there are options that are kind of almost to the speed of Ruby on Rails.
Flexibility, like I want this to be a prototype, but also to sort of get it to almost like sort of beta. Like I know, 2 years down the road, 3 years down the road, I fully expect to replace it. But I kind of want to use this to do, like, for example, some of the more unique, like the timeline for events and like actually the video snippet stuff. So I'm not sure if that.
I think this would be a good balance between because the framework itself gives you a lot of things being broken out and modular is the default. It's just how far you go down that road compared to
Right.
flexibility. Although hooks is a fairly recent addition, a year or so. So that may be another thing that adds kind of that modularity at very low cost of time. I haven't played with it yet. I've been wanting to, but I started my project before hooks officially came out, so I didn't have a chance. I haven't gone back. So that'd be fun to learn.
Yeah, I worked on a project that started before. So at first it was classes and state, the usual, and then hooks got introduced, and someone was very keen on using the newest technology, and I got slightly motivated, let's say, to use it as well. I learned it, and then we started replacing all state components with functional components, and it was fun, and it was it makes sense after a while.
Cool.
So
well, I
I'm
don't want to
wondering,
get too technical. Go ahead.
I'm actually just I would branch off of that thought there about not getting too technical. I wonder if we almost want to set up a different session, like just, even if it's just a half an hour, to sort of have that like tech stack conversation, and we can use like the really basic intro to WikiLection that I've created, but sort of meant to have around that conversation, like what goes into selecting a software stack, and sort of have a modernized version of that, because I think this will probably be useful for other people like me who like technical-ish enough to understand some of the conversation, but not a coder. So like this would be massively useful, because all the articles I read were, probably 2 or 3 years old or more. So I think that might be cool to like have it around the conversation on here's how we might build it, and here's the parts of it. Because the first, like, I can't even say MVP, like almost like the first, iteration is going to be just a very basic, like a web page that's showing data from a database.
It might still be good. I think it's great to have a conversation, and your plan of kind of developing in the open, I think that'd be helpful to a lot of people, and I support that. And Martusha, I think, is comfortable being on these live things too, so that'd be fun. It might be good to go ahead, if you're just going to finish up the specs, then maybe sometime after that, so you have it clear in your mind on what your minimum viable product is.
Right, yeah. I've got it. Sorry, Shiloh, you're trying to...
I'm sorry, you guys. I'm having a bad glare, and I can tell I have a migraine coming on, so I'm going to have to go off. So if you guys want to just keep going tech, I'm all for it. I'm sorry. I really wanted to participate.
All right.
Hope you feel better, Sean.
Thank you, guys. Sorry about that.
Sure, Shiloh.
Sure.
Yeah.
Talk to you soon.
All right, bye.
Yeah. It's a shame. I know that's rough when that happens.
Yeah. The sun does it for me as well, so that's probably coming soon. Yeah, so I'm not sure if we want to, because I mean, I've got the specs drafted, and now it's more just like trying to get it out of my head in a way that will make sense to somebody that's reading it. But like the intro specs I've got, and now it's just trying to sort of make it a bit easier to understand. So I'm not sure how technical we want to go in this call. I would lean probably more towards the like separate conversation, but if we think it makes sense in the idea.
Although if we're all here, they can hit stop on YouTube.
I guess, yeah.
Watch something else.
So let's do that, but let's first say, does anyone have anything, not technical, super geek out, deep dive, tech stack conversation that we want to get out of the way so people can, stop watching here or wherever?
I don't have anything else.
All right, here, let me pull up the specs, because it's not like they're so early days that there's nothing to show, but there's, some more hashing out. And like, if I were just to hand off the document to somebody that I wasn't in a live stream with, I would want to have more stuff going. This is taking forever to load. One sec. Oh, all right, it's going to do that stupid helpful Chrome OS thing where it's not showing in the browser anymore. Okay, good, it's still going.
And who knows, maybe the final version will be done on Holochain, which is something I started looking at, and
there's a very good chance that this ends up on one of those stacks.
It's so different, the thing. And I also started just for fun, because that's what people do for fun. They learn new programming languages, obviously. So I started learning Rust, and it's cool, really. It's like C++ with more safety and about, I think, the same speed. So it's still compiled language, but it has very interesting approach to pointers and other stuff that gets you in trouble in the usual C and C++. But in Rust, it's much more like contained and cool. Okay, and I'll
Yeah,
shut
Rust
up now.
sounds like an interesting
Cool.
option.
All right, so I've got this up. I don't think I can really zoom in too much because Chrome is doing a weird thing where it's trying to be helpful and be in an outside window. So we'll try to make it do. Is this
Is that
somewhat?
a doc?
Yeah, it's a
that you're using?
Google Doc.
I think you can zoom in the doc itself as well, and not use the.
Where are the controls for this? Because the problem is
Yeah, the
usually we just
controls are
open up
gone
in
right
a new
there.
tab and it's trying to like be helpful and have this other app for it that it just started doing like a week ago.
Okay, yeah, I don't
is
see
this-
how to do that either. It's
Actually,
legible.
what? Oh, okay.
I
I'm actually
can.
going to see what happens if I make it not full screen. If it'll maybe be bigger. Whoa, that's not the right window.
There you go, mobile.
All right, that's maybe I'll make it a little bit bigger than that, but I can see it zooming in the background. All right, that should be better.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll go over the basic stuff. I'm sure a lot of this is sort of self-explanatory, but just so that I'm sure. So of course, it's going to be hosted on wikielection.com. The first sort of edition or version, or what I'm just calling here a subdomain, is fiction.wikielection.com. In the future, there's going to be another sort of clone of it almost for app.wikielection.com, where app is the real world, like actual politicians and actual people. And then fiction is for sort of conversations with the same structure, but in various fiction worlds, so that we can have a really low risk, nobody gets pissed off because a page is saying bad things about them before it's ready to sort of actually summarize this stuff. So starting with fiction, and then at some point down the road, probably after the MVP, we'll have another version of it for real people, if that makes sense, where they would be totally separate databases except for the members. You can have one membership and access both. For the URL structure, probably nothing too shocking here. There's examples here for the fiction and the app, but it's just, like fiction.wikielection.com/people would show like an app to list the people and to do that. And then app.wikielection.com/people. So same thing, but the different subdomain, exact same app, but looking at the different list of people. And then finally, there's the example of like app.wikielection.com/person/ and then an ID would show the detail for that person. Because in this, one of the main sort of like a very important part of this is being able for other people to link, from an outside source into this to be like, hey, go check out this profile on this person. So to start with, they would, just go to that person's page where it would be like app.wikielection or fiction.wikielection and then /person/ the ID. You can put that on Facebook or Twitter, wherever to link to it. And then I think in the first version, I haven't tried the back end of whatever database we end up using, but I don't think that the MVP needs an actual member area yet. So if it's just like some sort of back-end database access where I or somebody can log in and like manually add records and edit them in the database, that's fine. Oh, somebody else joined in here. We can add them. Hi, Daniel.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Hello.
Oh, no, he's disconnected, but still here. We'll wait to see. I'll keep going and see if he connects in the background. Oh, I think he's back. 1 second. All right, you're back, Daniel. He left again. All right, let's keep going. So does that like sort of top level stuff, does that all make sense? Is there any
Makes sense.
questions or concerns? Cool. Oh, and now Bentley dropped off. Let me add Daniel back in there and we'll see if Bentley joins. Give this a second because there we go.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Okay. So that was that part of it. Then for the interface of the app itself, it's pretty It's simple. The top bar, there's a persistent top bar, like in many apps, where there's really not that many elements to it. Just there's the logo that would go on the left, a pretty basic like a menu drop down. At the start, it would just be a button that always says the same thing. It just says menu and then probably those 3 lines, and then you drop it down, and that menu will sort of evolve over time. And then we may add some usability to the menu control itself, but not for the MVP. And then a search bar, where of course it'll only be searching the objects that exist so far, and the MVP is just going to be like people and organizations. Hey Daniel. So that is the top bar. When member accounts are available, we just put the sign up and login links on the right here, like in many other applications. Not trying to reinvent the wheel here. That is the top bar. The page contents. This is a super basic one. Just the blue part underneath the top bar is what I'm calling page contents, where there's sort of 2 main types. There's like an app where that's things like the home page. If we end up building something fancy to like find an election and describe what's going on, that might end up being an app. And there's some examples provided. And then there's the record detail, where it's kind of still an app, I guess, but that's a specific one where sort of the page will change based on the record you're looking at. So if you look at 3 different companies, you're kind of still in the same structure of the app, and it's just the ID in the URL is changing, and then that will change the record it pulls the data from. And then we can go into the actual examples here. So for the MVP for apps, there's just the homepage. That's super basic. Like that's barely even a page. It's more just a landing page to have a spot to go to and to evolve. To start with, it'll be just like sort of some text and some explanation of the other areas that are available. And then over time, that will actually have some useful features added, but not in the MVP. There's the people app, where that is essentially just a grid showing all of the people records that we have, and the columns that we'd use would be dependent on the columns that actually make it into the app. But stuff like the first name, last name, where they reside, are they a politician or a journalist, that kind of thing. And then somewhere on there, a way to go to the actual record, probably just the person's name might show up as a link that you can click, and then it actually goes to that page. Organizations, basically the exact same thing, just it's showing from the organizations table instead of from the person table. So again, that's like a page for a certain organization, where it might have the organization's name, their logo, when they were founded, that sort of thing. But again, that's just a table of the list with the columns in the database that probably the organization name you click, and it goes to that page. Does that all make sense?
By people, you mean like the public figures that you are describing in the...
Right, yeah. A bit further on, it actually talks about like the tables in the database. These are sort of meant as like the plural version of those. It's not actually like, it's to be able to list, like if you ever used a CRM, you might have like the accounts page where it lists all the accounts, and then you have your account detail page where it's a single account that you're looking at in more detail. Almost exactly the same as that. So these are just two different tables in the database and 2 different apps that are listing those. And then over time, those pages would evolve to offer different ways to find people. So it might be regional or by occupation, or if you're an organization, like what industry you're in, that kind of thing.
Okay.
And then admin tools, I think I actually forgot to remove that part. That's not needed in the MVP, I don't think, unless I'm not able to access the database through the backend somehow, and then something might be needed. But I'm pretty sure I'll probably just be able to access the database itself, and then I don't need any admin tools for the first while, especially not for the MVP.
We'll see. Sometimes it's even possible to not have admin tools at all. Like it depends, but if all you want or need to edit are single records, usually it's possible for the system to edit them in place. Like the system already knows that you are logged in as yourself, you have admin rights, and then you can edit it like on the page without using any additional page.
That's totally where we'll end up, but in the MVP, there is no login. So there's all the stuff that we're talking about here is, I guess, public facing, and it's only published records as it says here. And then on the admin or backside, or direct access to the databases where things will actually be adjusted. But in the long term, yeah, we'll totally have like an actual login, and then you'll probably have admins and moderators and members and that whole thing that will get sorted out.
The login's pretty cheap to do.
Oh,
I wouldn't
okay.
mind if the devs did it right.
Yeah, no, yeah. With a lot of the stuff, I'm more just saying like, here's the bare bones. But for stuff like login that we'll definitely need, if it ends up being easy, like especially if it's something that it's just a module you can plug in and make a couple of tweaks, then yeah, totally fine with it being there. Which would then also add the probably login and register to that top bar. So that was the apps, and then we're looking at the record details itself. And then that sort of leads into the database area that talks about the individual records that we would be looking at. So there's the person table. There's going to end up being more fields than this, of course. But just to start with, like, you'll have a text field that's the full name. That might just be a combination of like the first name and last name and middle name and stuff. But I wouldn't be worried about that being that fancy in the MVP. It's fine just to have a single field called full name. We'd want a photo to actually store that and then to show it somewhere on the page, just to sort of as a slightly more difficult example for showing data. To also have to show an image. There's a description, which is where we put the bulk of the content describing that person until we have a field specifically for it. And then finally, the checkbox to show if it's published or not. So, you can have records that you're working on in the backend that you don't want to show on that public facing side yet. Once they're ready, you just check the publish box and they'll show up. And then this is a very basic screenshot, as you can see, where it's just showing like the person's name up top in the top right. We'll end up having some sort of a way to like say what category they're in. So if you're like, a scientist and a journalist, it might show both. If you're just a politician, it would just say politician. And then underneath the specific values that we have for that person. So like possibly, where they live, their current role, anything else that gets added here would end up on the page. So very similar to a CRM like Salesforce or something, if you ever use that. Before I go too far, Daniel, did you join for the tech stack conversation, or did you actually want to talk about what roles does your project need?
I don't know what the first thing that you said was. The text what?
So this meeting is usually people for sort of come here and represent their projects and sort of have a discussion around it. And today's topic was around what other roles you need to help with your project. That was sort of the main purpose. And then we had that conversation, and then we sort of went deep dive into my part, which is I'll actually need a developer for my project. And there's a good chance I'll be working with Bentley and Matoush. So that's why we sort of had this deep dive. So I wanted to figure out, are you here for the sort of technical deep dive into the conversation around development, or did you have a project that you wanted to talk about what roles you need help with?
I'm here to learn. I'd kind of stay out of the way if I don't have anything to add. I am working on a project. I'm not sure that I need any help with it right now.
Okay.
I can show it to some folks. Well, it's not even quite ready. So that's okay.
We do often, each of us each time, have a 30-second kind of just description of what the project is. Do you have a little description in mind you could just let us know?
Well, the problem that I'm trying to solve is cohesiveness across game groups that want to use game B as a way to orient themselves. So the idea being, when I go to a game B meeting, either because of the coronavirus, there's, a bunch of people are online right now. But when I go to a game B meeting, whether it's online or in my neighborhood or regional, I have some kind of idea what to expect. So that's what I'm working on.
Great. Sounds needed.
Cool.
Yeah, then I guess we'll just kind of continue going into a technical deep dive of Adriel's requirements for his wiki election prototype.
Yeah, sure.
If
And
you have any questions.
I'll think about if there's something I can share, but I would love to know, and otherwise I'll just listen. What problem are you trying to solve?
In the case of wiki election, the main problem being solved is misinformation, especially around politics, science, and the news. It can go pretty deep. I mean, I can talk for hours on that, so I won't go too deep. Yeah, so this is the MVP, so this won't really solve any problems yet. It's more meant as just the framework that will start to bolt things onto after the MVP stage so that we can start to actually solve some problems, if that makes sense.
By just saying who's who. So if someone's saying they're on some channel and I'm an expert, but if they're not in their database, then you can't know if they're an expert.
I mean, that's a part of it, is to end up having a list of, all the people involved, and that might be politicians, that might be experts, that might be journalists, the whole gamut of people who are sort of participating in that conversation. And then that's meant to be kind of, a bucket to hold a whole bunch of information about each person. So if you're a politician, you might see information around, what campaign promises did this person make, and then did they fulfill them, right? What sort of money did they take from, people and organizations during their campaign, and then what ended up happening when they were in office? Did they end up, giving special favors to the people who paid for their campaign? That sort of thing. So this top level, again, it's not useful yet. This is like bare bones skeleton, just a spot to hold information. And then, so for example, probably the very first version of this before it gets to the MVP is probably just going to be a list of people. We won't even have organizations and positions yet. But once we get those created, the positions will end up being able to join those two, right? And be able to say, this person has a position in this organization, or they had a position in that organization. And then we can show those lists on both. Here's all the positions that we know that this person has had. And here's the different people who have positions in this organization. And then we can start to track that all over the place. Yeah, so this itself won't sound terribly compelling if you sort of don't know like the full what's trying to be solved. Because this won't be useful. The MVP isn't really even an MVP because the viable part, it's not really viable at anything. This, I guess, is technically a pre-MVP. We're building up towards it. It won't truly become MVP until it has enough use to be shown to the public and start trying to get.
What does MVP mean?
MVP stands for minimum viable product.
Oh, okay.
So it's like, what's the least amount that you can build to actually have it still be useful? And someone's like, yeah, I could use this, right? Even if it's only.
And are you trying to frame this inside of a business, a nonprofit, a more Wikipedia, like donate if you can model?
Yeah, so it's going to end up being kind of like a Wikipedia style model where it's sort of all based on donations. A big part of it is it's probably going to come from like Patreon, Kickstarter, that kind of thing. So like no corporate donations, because I think that sort of makes people trust it less. If they find out, oh, X company donated $1 million, oh, they're probably, tied together.
Well, I'll just say I know way less about the problem you are trying to solve. So like I'll still just try to listen, but that's not an area I know a lot about. So
yeah, but feel free to chime in. I mean, if you have questions, there's a good chance other people do too. So, all right, so we're talking about people and those pages. The organization, very similar thing where it's just still displaying a record but in a different table. So instead of it displaying a person and their information, like a name and their picture, it's showing like the organization name, their website, the date they were started. I'll probably actually add another image field in here for the logo. And then again, it's going to show very similarly to a person where it has the name of the organization, their category, and then the sort of individual fields for that organization, and then their logo. And with a lot of this, like I really don't mind if it doesn't look exactly like this, if it's 10 times easier, to have the image on the left. And however, as long as it's showing data from the database that we can move around and tweak, that's the main thing I care about. Long term, we probably will want it to look a very specific way, but that's probably once we actually have like a UI designer involved. I don't have enough faith in my UI design abilities to draw any kind of line in the sand around. It has to look like this. So we have these two objects, the person and the organization, and then individually they aren't terribly useful. So we now have the position that sits in between those as what I would call a join table. So it's got a lookup to the person, a lookup to the organization, and then things like what is that position actually called, right? Were they the CEO? Were they on the board? What position were they actually filling in the organization? Start date if we know it, end date if we know it. And then this should, I guess I can't edit it from this view. And then again, a checkbox or a Boolean setting for if it's published or not. So that's sort of like your really bare bones, like first real sort of multi-object having things tied together. That's sort of that first step. And then after that, it goes into the events, where that's sort of like things that are important to keep in mind that happened in the history of that person or that organization. And so here you have the event itself, start date, end date, and the description, right? So like, what's the thing that happened? So that might be, for a politician, like a scandal, or they did something good. They had some fundraiser and raised a bunch of money. Whether it's good or bad, you sort of have the event itself, the thing that happened, and then underneath that you've got the event roles that say, okay, here's the event that event role is for, and then here's the person, the organization, or the position that's for. So if something happened, just in somebody's history, it might be an event role that just points to that person. But like, if a politician did something super important while they were in office, it might be linked to the person itself. It might be linked to their political party, so the organization, and then also might reference their position. So like, hey, they were the mayor of the city, through this political party when this event happened. And then again, you can have like the title of their role, which sometimes it might just be their position. But if you think about like if there was a crime committed, it might be like, are they an accomplice? Are they the person who actually did the thing itself? Were they the lawyer who prosecuted the case? So it's sort of their role in that event, and then the description. So that's sort of like the first. Again, it's probably a bit early to even call this an MVP because it's not even close to viable yet. But that's kind of like the first real. There's enough tables in there to actually start having stuff work together and start being able to log data.
Is that event data really the unique proposition or unique value that WikiElection provides?
I mean, that's one of many things, right? That's meant to be. I think I have
the first one.
Here.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of unique features, but is that kind of either the most important or the simplest to implement? The combination of, I guess maybe the way to say is the most efficient one, because it's both complexity cost versus value, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the highest value for lowest cost, and that's the thing that when you bring someone to show them the system, you'll say, okay, here's where this governor said X. Here's all the things this governor's done, and you can look at this to determine whether you want to vote for that guy.
Right, exactly. It's meant to start being able to build that timeline of what that person did, and then the event itself will have to end up growing. But one of the reasons why it's in there is it's sort of the thing that's related to kind of everything. Like a person can have an event at an organization, and you can have an event while you're in a position. And then one of the first things, because I think Bentley, you had sort of said, come up with the specs for like the really kind of the basic part, but then also try to come up with some of the more like unique portions to see if the person can handle that. And one of the sort of more unique things that would be done after these tables are created is to come up with a way to visualize these events over time. I've got a. Do I have that screenshot? Yeah, I've got it here in a second. I can sort of show you what that might look like.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I have in my mind which of these things are features that have to be there for that unique proposition that you want to show, and which of them is that kind of unique thing
Right.
that you want to
I gotcha. Oh, wow,
show.
this is...
And I see that, I mean, there's a lot of systems out there that have all of the elected officials, but your people list as elected officials plus people that are influential.
Right.
So there,
Exactly.
right now, I'm not aware of any system that has both of those in it. So that's another identifier. But I think the events part is the more unique piece.
Right. All right, now here, 1 second. I've got my presentation up here. Let me find
It's
that.
like additional dimension to this. You have people and the first two tables, people and organizations, and it means not only political parties but also like companies. So
Right.
then you can have history, which is like the time dimension, and for everyone on the list of people, you can visualize straight away. Like they got elected as mayor of some city, and after they finished the job, they started working at local company of something, and that is kind of like suspicious.
Right. Yeah.
Potentially.
So any of those, like those really weird, like, wait, they had this scandal and then they immediately went to work for that company. Hold on. Like that sort of thing is what we want to highlight here. So this is a very early mock-up. It's pretty ugly, I'm aware. But this is meant to show, hopefully it's zoomed in enough in the actual screen share, this sort of bar here showing like it shows they started as a teacher and then they went to the school board for 2 terms and then they became a council member for 2 terms and now they're a mayor. And then underneath that, you can see these 3, those are the actual events. And that red arrow was pointing at the one sort of being shown underneath. So like there's an event there called like abuse of power. And it would need a better name than in the actual thing. But this is just the example where you have an event called, like, I don't know, mayoral abuse of power or something. And then this mayor, Stephen Connor, would have a role in that, like as the person who did it or the person who was accused of doing it. And then in this case, this event involves the firing of a comptroller. So that comptroller would also have a role in this saying, oh, they were fired as a part of this event. We wouldn't care about that showing up on the comptroller timeline probably, but we would definitely want to make sure, hey, if this mayor is prone to abusing their power, it's probably good for voters to know. So that's where it's showing like, hey, there's an item showing up. And right in between the item itself and the timeline, you can see like an arrow showing when that happened. And if you look at the one in the middle for excessive expenses, it shows it happened 3 times. It's pointing to 3 different spots in their timeline. So that's one, like once we have the people and the organizations and the positions and the events, this is one of the first sort of like custom interface elements that I think that can be built. Probably not the very bottom part, because that's actually like the news articles backing it up, although that would come in pretty short order, because the evidence is actually probably one of the most integral pieces of all of the election. And that's probably where it's going to start, as being the backup evidence for the events. So that if we're going to say, hey, here's the important events on this politician's history, you better make sure you have evidence to back it up. Does that make the events part make a bit more sense?
Yeah, it does make sense.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, really, yeah, the evidence is a big piece, but yeah, I guess the event itself is the first kind of main core item.
Exactly. And then this will sort of give us the framework to say, hey, if we're trying to collect evidence for something on somebody's history, that will probably lead to the first time where we actually need to review evidence, saying like, hey, these news articles, are they relevant to the story? Did they seem to have proper due process, or whatever the early criteria are? But that one will end up evolving massively, because as you know, there's a bunch of different kinds of evidence that will all have their own criteria. And this will sort of be the first dive. But that will probably be like a couple steps into the It'll probably actually be needed for the MVP, so it'll happen somewhere in there, but it'll be a couple steps down the road.
I guess this is the part where it gets tricky, because evidence is a very subtle word,
right?
And usually politicians do not take it easy to have stuff published if it's not really well documented. So they can still sue like the place where it got published, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that will probably change a lot country by country. Both the US and Canada have, it's fairly difficult as long as you follow certain rules for libel or slander. But that's a very important thing, is as we start to go into other countries, to make sure that if things are tricky, that they're, for using evidence to back something up, that might delay us going into that country.
Question.
Sure.
I do see that there's, it says abuse of power. I guess you're thinking this looks, my screen isn't very big here, but it looks like a timeline.
Right.
And people so it is chronological. And you're saying you could add good things or bad things.
Right, yeah.
Hey, this person, look at their track record. They've got 50 green things and only 4 yellow things and maybe 1 red thing.
Exactly. Yeah, and that you see that playing out in such a large scale in the U.S. election, right? Where everyone wants to say, well, that politician has only ever done bad things and they've never done anything good or useful. And that claim is being made about every single person in the race, right? So if you could have something where it goes here and it says, here's all the good and the bad and the
Yeah, okay. It's and this makes me just think, how do you curate something like this? Does an abuse of power, are we only tracking actual things that were legally, in a court of law said, well, this was against the law? Because some people right.
So
is it Marcius? Well, Matush sounded like, this is where it gets really tricky. How does one person something's an abuse of power, and to someone else they're doing their job correctly? Right. And yep. I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just saying, wow, this is
all this is
why not my area of expertise.
Right. First of all, I will say, anybody that sees the whole presentation, they're like, this is going to be really difficult. Yeah, it is. There's a lot of stuff in here that I haven't seen handled anywhere, but this is sort of starting from we need to solve misinformation. So what's needed to support that? Sorry, go ahead, Matthew.
Collective intelligence. It's I can imagine this as being first, one category is things that are actually legally, what's the word? If they got sued for something and they got convicted, then it's a fact, legal fact that can be published straight away, because it's on the other hand, an event like someone opened a court case for something against a politician, that's news, right? We are not stating that they are guilty of something, but merely that such an event happened.
Right.
And then for stuff that is not quite legal, and a politician signed a contract with a company run by his brother, which is not strictly against the law, but it's kind of fishy.
Right.
Then we could have voting element, and people can just vote if they think that's an abuse of power or not.
Right. Yeah, and that's not shown very well in this, but you can sort of see underneath where so the red arrow is pointing at sort of an attempt to categorize what that event means. So in this case, it's saying that one's only suspected because in the wording of the text, which is way too small to read here, it's saying that actually hasn't been proven in court, but there is a bunch of evidence and it got thrown out for whatever reason. Technically, that one might not show up if it's not sort of hitting a certain threshold that the community says, like, because there are times, especially with politicians, where something gets pardoned, or they end up going to a judge that's a friend of theirs, and everyone seems okay with it for some reason, and the case is dropped. This is all about making sure that the public feels that they can trust what they're seeing, while still obeying the law. Because if we show something that's not technically, like, if it actually is libel or slander, then we don't want to show it, because then we open ourselves up to lawsuits, and that's bad.
Have you decided on the scope of the first use of this? Like, because it's a lot of data entry. Have you thought that? Yeah, I don't know if you said like a certain city or a certain state or a certain government, and maybe just the top officials.
So that's one of the reasons why, and some people might think that this is sort of overly complicating it and weird, but that's a big part of it, why we're starting with fiction. So we can do whatever the hell we want, right? If I'm talking about like Leslie Nopes from Parks and Recreation, part of it is like building that timeline of here's what that fictional character did in the show. Here's a timeline of it. Your evidence becomes like, oh, go reference this part of the show, season 2, episode 4, from 2 minutes to blah, blah, blah. It gives a really low risk spot to have that conversation and like to build a timeline and to build evidence before we actually start doing it about real people. So we hash out any of those issues with like going and collecting evidence and showing it with people who can't sue us because they aren't real. And like, even if stuff was wrong, who cares? It's a summary of a fictional character. And then at some point, we'll have a spot where we have this stuff for real people, but it's members only. You can't see it as a part of the public yet until we're pretty confident that like this can hold water, right? Like if we're going to say something about a politician, we want to be as reasonably sure as possible that we can defend that and at least say, hey, there's a reason why we are showing that. Here's all the evidence. And possibly even saying, hey, we aren't saying it's true. We're saying here's all the evidence. A big part of this that's going to be weird is showing things that we know aren't true. And we don't show it on the timeline by default. But like if somebody searches about something, about someone that we know is false, part of this is cut almost to work like Snopes. So we're saying like, yeah, we know all about that claim about that person. Here's all the reasons it's bunk. But then you wouldn't see it on that person because we don't want to show like, hey, some people think this, even though there's no evidence. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you want to just start with fictional to begin with,
right?
Because I mean, I think it would be small enough. I don't know on our timeline, but to do the U.S. election, and there's 2 people, right? Although Trump is putting out a heck of a lot of content, so yeah. I don't even know if you can keep up with Trump. But
Trump is going to have 70,000 events in the last 2 years, and Joe Biden has been in politics for what, 40 years, 50 years, or something like that. So they're both going to have a ton of content.
I guess that is kind of big.
Depending how fast development goes, like the fictional part will be public as sort of a, hey, here's the output of what this might look like for some fictional politicians, just so that you can see what it looks like. Pretty soon into the process, when we have a member section, people will be able to log in and sort of say, which world do you want to go to? They'll be able to work on actual real people and logging data, but that information won't be publicized yet until we're pretty sure that like it's defendable and accurate, as accurate as it can be.
I would love to see a demo version being done about Game of Thrones.
Yeah, that would be.
Would you vote for Tyrion Lannister, and why?
That's another part to why I kind of want to do fiction, is to have some sort of like a contest on Reddit or something and let people go on there and have fun with it, right? And build why is this fictional character a better leader than that? And build that big catalog of history. So you're like, you think that Jon Snow is better than Tyrion? Why? And start to build a timeline of what they did and summarize it, and a part that each event has to have. Because if you think about somebody like Trump, there's going to be way too many events. So the goal is that part of it is the community sort of says like what priority that event kind of shows that Trump has, or what sort of like, character traits. And then if, he has a single event showing something, well, that's probably not enough to boil it up to the top. But, if he has 10,000 events that show a certain character trait, or a certain, like, he values this or doesn't value that, a big part of this is to be able to summarize, like, without going into the minutia of all the events that have ever happened, what sort of summary can we come up with about this person based on their events? And then if you want to drill in and say like, oh, you say that this person, you know, is a business mogul, right? They're great for business and the economy. Great. You can click there and see all the events that support or, you know, refute that.
Well, we're right at about an hour, so it's probably a good place to
I can probably
kind of start stopping. But I wonder if we want to just take another minute and Adriel talk about what are the next steps. Do you need a couple of kind of estimates for building this out? Are you going to float it out to other developers other than me and Martush? And
I mean, if you guys are willing to do it, I'm totally fine with just going with you two, because I'd much rather work with somebody that I actually know. Now, one of the things I had mentioned to Matush as like a possible thing is to use Upwork to actually like do the payments and stuff. And part of the reason for Matush was to help build his profile of like, hey, I did this project and had this number of hours, and here's the outcome. Because I know when I search on Upwork, I usually filter by like, okay, they have to build out at least 100 hours and they have to have these things.
Yeah, so I think that's a good idea.
That's an option if we want to go that way.
Yeah, and I've been having trouble with within these kind of group projects of we still haven't worked out the kind of game B way to make decisions as a group.
Right.
So it might be best if one of us takes the lead, and so probably Martush, if you don't mind, then I'm happy to jump in and pitch in and work a couple hours, and that if there's any tough decisions, then there could be one person making a technical decision. I'm happy with that. But anyway, so I don't know what you need, Adriel. If you want to just give us a budget and see how far we can get, or you and Martush can talk about that. And maybe there's not even enough time for me to help out. I'm completely flexible. We could have another meeting to chat through that, or if you what do you need from me or Martush?
I guess probably a good thing is like if we're talking about not this event stuff, but like just the person, the organization, the position, events, and event roles, just sort of to get that online and not very pretty, but just being able to have a site that has all the pages that are talked about without any of this custom visualization, to just get that online, what would that cost? Like that would probably be a good start. And in whatever software stack you want to use, and then I guess a part of that is then I would have to go out and find out like what does it involve to get that kind of a stack set up. I did take a quick look at DigitalOcean, and it seems I'll probably go with them. I kind of regret using my computer because now I'm seeing ads for them everywhere. But yeah, I think that's probably a good step. If we can get like the estimate of here's how much I think it will cost to get to that step, and then like what stack you're thinking of using for that quote. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and maybe if Martush and I come up with that separately, we can compare and see if either of us are off.
That's probably good. Yeah.
Am I pushing too much, Martush? Do you like that idea?
No, that's good. That's good. I like it.
Good. I want to make sure I'm not taking over.
Yeah,
I've managed a lot of people, so I tend to just take over. Sometimes you got to be careful about that.
No, absolutely, that's not a problem. I usually do the technical part, and as I'm good at self-managing, but for like group projects, it does make sense. Yeah, we can do it this way.
Okay, and we can flex around. This is just an idea. So
if we're trying to do kind of an open development concept, it might almost like kind of heard the three main roles there, right? Like if Bentley were the project manager and Matush is the developer and I'm the product manager, that's kind of the three corners of like, if we're going to have a conversation around almost anything, those are the people that I usually want to involve.
Yeah, we could start off like that and just flex, we don't have hard and fast rules. We're
exactly.
right?
It aligns. Like if Matush or I have, a question or an idea for project stuff, cool. If either of you guys have an idea or a question about the product stuff, fine, because it is like it's open, and that's a part of the reason why I like to work with people who I know, So I sort of know like, oh, they'll chime up, or they'll pipe up if they hear something that they don't agree with or they have a concern.
Yeah. All right. Well, then we probably need to shut down. We're 5 minutes over. And
Oh, perfect. All right. Goodbye, YouTube and Facebook.